The problem with a lot of the traditional games is, you have players where they're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy playing these games, and maybe they're winning a custom skin. Maybe it's a skin for, a car in GTA, or maybe it's a skin for a gun in CSGO. But, these items are still owned by, in a sense, the game company. It's like, you don't really own them. I can't sell you my car. You can't sell me your gun. If you spend a lot of time and maybe even money to kind of earn something, how is that different from traditional work? And why can't you have that in your possession?
Hey, Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, my friend. Good seeing you again.
Yeah, man, always a pleasure. I'm so excited to talk about gaming and Web3 and the convergence of the two. I think it's a hugely misunderrepresented, misunderstood, lack of information out there, combination that works together kind of like peanut butter and jelly. And I know you're just the person to educate us a little bit about it.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Just for background, like I've worked with about 250 global brands over the years, and definitely worked in the gaming sector quite a bit. I've worked with a lot of the big gaming studios. When I was at Amazon, I worked in cloud gaming, and then even back in the day, I used to work with a lot of the kind of casual game companies, like the folks that made Candy Crush. And I think there's a little bit of maybe a misunderstanding of like how blockchain and gaming converge, or what the future of it looks like. And so, one of the things that I've noticed is in the beginning, a lot of these early games were trying to build 100% on chain, right? And I think you have to take a step back and go, is that really what makes sense? Meaning, does a game really truly need to live 100% on chain to be fun, right? To be engaging, to be, a viral hit? And I think the answer is no. And so, a lot of those early games, used to hear the kind of acronym play to earn. It was show up every day, click a button, earn some points, come back the next day, click a button. And you can hear just based on me talking about it, it's not very fun, right? And now I think what you're seeing is kind of the next iteration of that. And I think we're, again, like at the beginning stages, where a lot of these games are actually building on things like Unity and Unreal Engine. And they're really just kind of tapping in and out of the blockchain for various elements of the game. And so, now you're seeing actual kind of fun to play games emerging in things like the Epic Game Store. And for some of them, a lot of folks don't even realize blockchain's even involved.
Yeah, and let's back up a little bit about talk about like gaming in general. So the cool thing is, like, I was a gamer growing up, right? And I remember putting thousands of hours into a game. And then I remember sort of this progression of games where you spend more and more time, and then microtransactions, started to become a thing. So maybe the game was free to play, but that a gaming company would want you to spend, $1 here, $1 there. Some people would spend thousands of dollars. And there started to become this feeling like gaming companies were only seeking to extract more and more value from their audiences. And what I found really exciting when I was introduced to Web3 gaming, it was the first real time that I was introduced to a model that made sense potentially in execution, where I could get that value back, right? Where I could take the time that I had spent, whether it was earning an item, whether it was leveling up a character, and I could, in a very free exchange way, go sell that to another interested party. And I want to focus on that too. I think I want to get into the, how gaming is sort of progressing to Web3, but just from a problem awareness perspective, this is like very, very exciting and a very big deal. And I think people, especially maybe an older generation that's not familiar with the idea of gaming in general, they don't understand how big a problem this is.
Yeah, 100%. I think, when you think about gaming, or even going back to some of these kind of early social games, the in-game item economy obviously has been kind of a focus for many. And I think the problem with a lot of the traditional games is, you have players where they're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy playing these games, some even like professionally now, via esports leagues or sponsorship deals and things like that. And at the end of the day, they're spending a lot of time and maybe they're winning a custom skin. Maybe it's a skin for, a car in GTA, or maybe it's a skin for a gun in CSGO. But these items are still owned by, in a sense, the game company. It's like you don't really own them. I can't sell you my car. You can't sell me your gun. Or, for example, when we think about like Nintendo, for example, you think about interop in the future. what if all the Nintendo games integrated in with one another, and you could take, this character that you've won in one game and bring them into another game. And so now you're racing through Mario with this special character, but then you're driving with them in Mario Kart, and then you're, climbing up the ladders of Donkey Kong with them. But, I think, again, the notion of just the interop piece still goes back to this notion of kind of ownership, and the fact that, if you spend a lot of time and maybe even money to kind of earn something, how is that different from traditional work, and why can't you have that in your possession? And then I think the other thing to think about, like I go back to, brands like Supreme or Kith, is, again, rarity. It's like some of these items, there's only going to be a very limited amount of them, made, even though they're digital items or virtual items. Laws of supply and demand, if there's large demand for it, that asset could be worth a significant amount to a fellow video game lover, a fellow collector, right? Again, if you put in the sweat equity to kind of earn that item, why shouldn't you be the one to decide whether or not you continue to control it, or you sell it to someone else? And so I think a lot of it has to do with this notion of kind of IP ownership. My take, and again, candidly, I'm more of a casual gamer, is I think sometimes gamers, worry about that this stuff kind of ruins the games. But again, the way I look at it is, the game is still fun to play. The game is still built on something like a Unity or Unreal. I'm still playing the exact same game. It's just now when I level up and I win something, like, it's under my control and it's my possession. And I like that. And I think others over time will start to realize that, especially with the blockchain starting to be hidden behind some of these games. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, here's an analogy I love, right? So it's like, we've all gone to Chuck E. Cheese. So imagine going to Chuck E. Cheese and we spend a full day earning 10,000 tickets. And we buy a bunch of stuff with the tickets. We buy a bunch of what we think is cool. Maybe it's like a little radio or whatever they're selling nowadays. But then they tell us, Andrew, you can only play with this while you're at Chuck E. Cheese. As soon as you leave Chuck E. Cheese, you can't take your prizes with you. Now, if a different model never existed, we might go, well, that's just the way things are, right? But then the minute that a new Chuck E. Cheese competitor comes out and says, hey, you can take your items with you, you can even sell them on eBay, you can do whatever you want with them, well, that's kind of a game changer. And then maybe a competitor to Chuck E. Cheese comes out that says, you're going to be able to earn Rolexes and, potentially cars at this Chuck E. Cheese competitor. Now suddenly maybe adults like me and you want to do it professionally, maybe not me and you, but maybe somebody like me and you. And I think that's really what Web3 has done. And, what I've always said about Web3 is it enables this new ownership mindset. And if you didn't have that before, once you have it, you're never going back, right? So you're never going to go to the Chuck E. Cheese in this analogy that doesn't let you bring the games out or the things you've won, the prizes, out of their store. If you can go to a competitor, and they will, you're never going backwards. And I think once the Pandora's box has sort of been opened from Web3 gaming, you can start to do a lot of cool things with it. And that's what I think companies like SKALE and other gaming companies, they're all having their unique vision and how it will all work. And everybody's trying to figure out the economics and the ideal technology and all this stack. But at its core, it's very easy to see, if you're interested in the space, that once people are able to take the monetization of their time, the fruits of their labor, and take them with them, even if they're casual like me and you, they're never going to go back to a system where they can't do that.
Exactly. I mean, I'll give you a great example. Like, I love kind of classic car racing games, on Switch, right? And, I may play this one game for, 40 hours and level up and, win in every country and win every special car. And then I've got another game, and sometimes I'm like, well, wouldn't it be fun to be able to take that car that I won for playing 40 hours over here and drive it on this track over there? And, right now, obviously you can't really do that, but you start to see some of this even now in Web3. I mean, I think part of it is you have a lot of, early young games, and they're looking for ways to drive exposure and awareness. And so you're seeing things like, one game bringing characters from another game into it, just from a creative standpoint, right? And then you fast forward and you start to think about, yeah, but what about all the interoperability between this? Like, is my character actually my avatar? And am I taking it into all different environments? Now I'm taking it car racing. Now I'm taking it mountain climbing, and I'm earning points in kind of a unified way. And so, I think about not just this notion of ownership in game, but also just how all of these, virtual worlds maybe start to connect together in like new and interesting ways. Or even like another thing I think about is, if you go back to kind of the early AR days, when you look at kind of what Pokemon Go did in terms of driving thousands of people into parks in New York City, then you start to think about, okay, well, with this ownership, a lot of it right now is on PC. We're starting to see more shift over towards mobile, but again, as new emerging technologies come out, you could see this translate into those worlds as well in really innovative ways.
Yeah, I love that. I think we did a segment with your CEO at Consensus, and this idea of once you've leveled up the character or earned a special item in one game, that will translate to an equally special item in another game, I think is incredible because, as somebody that gets really involved in a game, when I do get in a game and I might spend a lot of time just playing that one, it's so, it almost becomes a burden to want to switch games because you're going from, it's almost like switching industries as a professional, right? You're going from the top of the totem pole to the bottom of the totem pole. And I love this idea that you can have, this, we'll call it like earned VIP status that you get to take with you in other virtual worlds.
You know what I compare it to? Honestly, it's airline status matching. It's, I'm Diamond Medallion on Delta, and maybe I'm interested in trying American for the first time, but I don't want to fly without my status, right? And so they offer you status match, and then maybe you try it, maybe you like it better, maybe you become a loyal customer. And I think that's part of what it is with a lot of these games, it's like you spend a lot of time and energy, to your point, like leveling up and becoming really good at it. And then again, maybe you do want to try out some new games, but you don't want to start at square one. This technology can allow and enable that to happen, right? And I think that's exciting. I think that's exciting for not just players, but also for developers, because think about it, you and I both know, like a lot of gamers, they get a game, they play it for a very long time. Well, if they could bring that same clout that they have in one game to another game in 2 seconds, what is that going to do for the trials of new games and maybe for emerging developers, right? It's exciting.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the analogy I thought is, hotels, right? For instance, like you're a Marriott Platinum member or whatever it is, but only at one location, right? That would feel pretty weird, right? It's like, oh, well, only here, but not at our other locations. And this is a way to take that with you. So let's talk a little bit. I know these numbers inside out. You're a numbers guy, you're an analytics guy, but at the end of the day, like, I don't think most people realize how much money there is in gaming and what will be the spoils for the victor that takes gaming to the next level, right? So a company like SKALE, if successful, how like the magnitude of that success?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the gaming industry is pretty massive. I think, a lot of the projections that I've seen, are basically saying hundreds of billions of dollars. I think right now, again, if you look at, the size of not just kind of the console gaming industry, but also the casual gaming industry. And then you start to look at streaming platforms that are leaning into gaming like Twitch, or you start to look into, gamified social platforms and networks. I mean, gamification is really something that can touch a lot of different industries. And when we look at kind of the traditional gaming industry, that alone is pretty massive. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there's like a lot of people that are investors, for example, that don't look at alternative asset classes that often, or they look at the standards. They never even think of gaming. They don't think like, here's a popular game in the App Store that's making millions of dollars to tens of millions of dollars a day, right? They don't think like World of Warcraft at its peak is making, I don't know what the number is, 10 to $100 million a day or whatever, some ridiculous number. They don't think that a company that allows people to watch other people game was a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, right? I don't think people are aware that how big the industry is, but I think understanding that makes you really pay attention to it more.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even going back to kind of my Hollywood days, I mean, and this was, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, back then, I mean, it was really all about kind of motion picture, film, television, music tours. And I remember back in the day, like going to a lot of these massive launch events for things like Activision. And we all kind of took notice because it was pretty clear that they were investing significant dollars into kind of marketing and promotion and things like that. But it's been interesting to watch over time, just, as the younger generation grows, they remain kind of active gamers. That has really taken over, I think, a lot of the traditional opportunity in entertainment. I mean, I can tell you, I have a lot of friends in LA that have literally shifted from traditional entertainment to gaming, or have gone working from, studios to, mobile app platforms and things like that. And so there's definitely, I think, increased growth opportunity. And then I think the other thing with gaming is it tends to be a little bit more global in nature because, if you think about TV or film, one, you've got to translate it for other countries, but also take a step back. A comedic motion picture, there may be a different comedic sensibility in every country. It may not resonate, right? Whereas a fun to play game is the type of thing that can really easily cross borders and boundaries and become, a global sensation or hit. Yeah.
100%. So talk to us a little bit about why crypto. Like, why does Web3, why does blockchain, why does that solve some of these problems? And why is it such a good combination with gaming?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, again, with blockchain, I mean, really what it's about is, again, the ownership component, right? And right now, a lot of folks are referring to this as NFTs or digital assets. But the way to think about it is, with the blockchain, you can verify kind of ownership of specific items, right? And so at the end of the day, you could be playing a game and, you've reached a certain level and quote unquote, you now won this new skin for your car. And then you're minting that, into quote unquote an NFT format. But I do think in the future, they'll refer to it as something else. But again, because it's attached to the blockchain and because it's attached to your wallet address, you own that asset, right? And then at the end of the day, what that asset's used for can be dictated by, one side or both, right? Like, a game could create something where you are identifying the fact that you own this asset and it's unlocking a special level. Or maybe it's increasing the speed of your vehicle because, again, it's identified that data point. Or, again, another game might emerge and they want to enable you to play with that item in their game. And then again, the data on one side is identifying the ownership of that item, and that data is unlocking something special, right? So I think, again, it's a good example of this even is when I talk to a lot of folks that work in kind of the luxury industry. They've been talking about obviously the issues that they have with counterfeit goods. And can you take, again, NFTs, digital assets, in-game items, attach them to luxury goods just to better verify actual authenticity, right? And so I think, again, it's a little bit similar where you're in a game, and because this thing is tied to the data, it's guaranteed authentic and therefore, interops with the game.
Yeah, it's really about transfer of ownership, right? So it's like, if I go play like a Blizzard game and I earn some special item, well, that item sits on their database associated with my account. So how do I get that off? How do I take that with me? It's really hard for them to even tackle if they want, right? And I think this is where, crypto really shines at its core is it's a transparent database where you have control of the assets that you have control over and you can do what you want with them. So by having a game built on top of that function, what I'm hearing you say is, you earn an item, it's instantly in your wallet. It's not in our database. So we might give it to you, we might not give it to you. And so it's yours to take with as you please.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing that I think is interesting is, like, again, this notion of like supply and demand, right? So let's say you're playing, for example, a shooter game and, they decide that they're going to, I'll use the Supreme model. They decide they're going to launch, 25 of this exclusive gun, and, they're going to be available for purchase and usage in the game. And it has all this additional utility. There's all kinds of things you can do with that. So one, they can price those items at whatever the demand is at, right? Two, they can have things like NFTs that gate the purchasing process, right? So when you think about like exclusive drops, hey, we just identified the 10 people that play our game more than anyone in the world. And as a result, we're awarding them this NFT, and that NFT unlocks the ability for them to buy those skins, 24 hours in advance of anyone else, right? So there's a lot of like really interesting ways to leverage the technology. But the other thing is, when we talk about supply and demand, that's interesting is, let's say you are, the top gamer in the world, and you're like, what? I have all this money from winning all these tournaments. I want to buy up all 10 of these guns. You can also typically do what's called a burn. So they could say, well, right now there's 10 of them in the world, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to burn 9 of them. And now there's only 1, right? So when you think about just supply and demand and rarity, there's also, I think, with blockchain technology, the ability to impact some of that stuff, which is really innovative and really cool.
And as a gaming company, are these thought of as ways to add value to the end user? Like, what's the philosophy here? Because these are really interesting things, right? So, for example, the idea of, we're only going to issue 25 of these skins, but of course, in a centralized game, they could announce the next day, actually, we're going to do 500. And you would have no control over that as a user. You also wouldn't know if there were ever 25 actually ever made. I remember when I was playing more games, there were these rare items and nobody was sure if anybody actually owned them or if they actually existed, because it was like you'd have to see one. It's like, Bigfoot or something, right? Like you'd have to see it in the wild and maybe someone took a screenshot of it and you wonder if that screenshot's authentic. That kind of stuff goes away here. And I imagine that the reason why gaming companies in Web3 are pursuing these different models is the perception for the end customer.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, again, I'm not a gaming CMO, but I think there's always this kind of back and forth of, you know, gamers at the end of the day, they just want a game that's fun to play, that they enjoy, right? And I think I'll give you an example of where I get frustrated as a gamer. It's like there's some games where I play where, you now have to go purchase all these additional items to play every level or do something fun. And I think again, that experience that you expected of, I'm going to pop this game open and have a good time, starts to feel like, okay, I'm basically being milked for, every penny I can get in order to just play this game. Right. And so I think that's a little bit of the dichotomy is, I think the opportunity for gaming companies is actually to enhance the player experience, right? Give players ownership over these items, and at the end of the day, when you think about royalties, I mean, what I would do if I were running a gaming company is, give my consumers ownership of these items and then create the marketplace where they can buy and sell them with each other. And then you're also getting royalties off of secondary sales of these items, right? But at the end of the day, I think, there's really an opportunity to create a better consumer experience or a more interoperable consumer experience. But I think the challenge is that a lot of gamers sometimes feel like the motive is less about a better experience for them and more about, a new financial model or revenue stream for the business. Right. And so, yeah.
I love that. So you said something important there and I want to dig into it. You said, I'm not a gaming CMO. And that's totally true, right? So Scale is a gaming chain. It's a chain, blockchain focused as one of the areas on gaming. I want to dig into that a little bit from a high level. There's always been this debate in crypto historically. I think it's less of a debate now of, is this going to be a multi-chain future or one chain to kind of rule them all? And, I want to hear it in your words, but I think what we're seeing is that it makes a tremendous amount of sense to design individual chains for achieving specific things. And there's a lot of advantages in doing that, both for the protocols that build on top of those chains and ultimately the users that use those chains.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, listen, I've now been the CMO of two different, blockchains or blockchain networks. And I've always believed the future is multi-chain. Like it's always funny to me because you see a lot of kind of battling between chains. Sometimes we call it the chain wars. And the truth of the matter is long term, there's going to be probably hundreds, if not thousands of chains, right? And that's the part that's funny. I think, again, right now, everybody's probably fighting over TVL metrics, which, again, not even my number one priority here. But I think, real quick, with Scale, I mean, really what it boils down to is we were built different from day one, right? So we're not an alt1, but we're also not technically an L2, even though we're L2-ish. Really what we are is a modular app chain network. And what that means is, there's kind of two options for you. One is if you're building a project, you can launch it on what's called a hub chain, which I'll explain, or you can actually launch your own app chain, right? And so examples being right now, we have one chain that is pretty much a gaming chain. We have tons of games built on that chain, right? We have another chain that is kind of an AI chain. We have tons of AI projects that are currently building there. We have another chain, for DeFi and for all things kind of financial. We have a testnet chain, right? We have all these different chains. And the benefit of these hub chains is, let's say you're a emerging game developer. You can now rent block space on that hub chain, and other games are renting block space with you, which enables for kind of these gas-free transactions, right? Let's say your game ends up in the Epic Game Store and, ends up in IGN and ends up on, Polygon news and all of that. And it just blows up to like millions and millions of players. Well, you might need more block space. And then at that point, if you want to, you can very easily just launch your own app chain that's 100% dedicated to you. And so I think part of the reason the model's so great right now is, you can rent this block space, you can rent as much as you need today, but then in the future, you can actually scale up to support, hundreds of millions of users. And I think like the one thing I would say is a lot of times what you see with blockchains is they either say they're kind of general purpose or purpose based, right? General purpose meaning, build anything on us. And then purpose based, usually what you see is, we are a chain specifically built for DeFi, or we are a chain specifically built for gaming. We are GP, but the difference for us is like there is a bit of a purpose, right? So we were built to handle high throughput applications, right? And so examples of that would be a video game, right? On one end, we have videos of this that are great. You're seeing super fast, beautiful gameplay, but then behind the scenes, there's tons and tons and tons of transactions processing, right? Same thing with AI. Like a lot of people don't realize, but AI requires a lot of compute power, right? So if you're using an AI product like a ChatGPT, whatever, behind the scenes, there's a lot of transactions churning, from a crypto standpoint. And then the last one I would say is social. So same thing. Anyone that's ever, built a social platform or worked for a social platform knows that there's a lot of interactions and it's a really complicated technology to actually build. But those are three examples of things that are high throughput. And so what I typically say is, if you're building something that's high throughput, a la game, AI, social, you're going to want a chain that can actually handle that, because what ends up happening is, maybe you only have 1,000 users today, but 6 months later, maybe all of a sudden you've got 1 million. Can your chain actually handle that throughput? A lot of times it can't, right? And so I think that's why we see a lot of games, for example, building on Scale, is because one, they know that it can actually handle the game. And I have seen chains crash, other chains crash that couldn't handle the games or couldn't handle the player amount or things like that. But then also we have that unique value proposition of being gasless, right? So same thing, you're playing a game, you don't have to stop every 5 minutes to process a transaction. You don't have to stop every 5 minutes to pay a gas fee. You just play the game and enjoy it. So I think for a lot of these gaming devs, they're like, we want to bring in real gamers, not just speculative, gamers. And how do we do that? We need to create an experience that parallels the experience that they're used to, or is better than that experience,
Yeah, and that's super important, right? Because gas fees are this transaction fee that you have to pay every time you do a transaction on the blockchain. If you're doing thousands of these microtransactions, gas fees are usually somewhat fixed. But even if they're low cost, that starts to add up very fast. And no one's going to want to play a game if they're having to pay out 10 or 100 or more dollars per day just to play the game in a way that they're used to playing on a console.
100%. I mean, I can even tell you, again, I worked for a layer 2 before, but, I like to, when I work at a chain, I like to, dive into the ecosystem and know the products and know the teams and actually use the products. And, I was playing a lot of games on a layer 2, and even though a layer 2 has, lower cost gas fees than Ethereum, they're not nothing, especially when Ethereum surges. And so for some of these games, I was still paying $100 a month in gas fees, which, doesn't sound like a lot, but, for some folks in some countries, that is a lot of money. Or if you're playing, 5 different games a month, now you're racking up $500 a month. And again, the game developer would rather see, that flow into the game. And I think even the player, same thing. Like if I had the choice of, hey, I'm going to play the same game for 2 months, and at the end of it, I have 2 options. One, I've paid a lot of gas fees. And 2, the other option is I took the money that I would have spent on gas fees and bought dope in-game items that up-level my experience. Like pretty easy answer for anyone, right? And so I think, not only that, but it's the accessibility piece. It's like, again, you don't have to live in a first world country to be able to play and enjoy these games. You can literally jump on, pay no gas fees and have a good time with your friends.
Yeah, look, I think the nature of games is people only have a certain amount of money they want to pay to play most games, especially when there's, like you mentioned, there's no additional value to you. It's not like I'm getting items in exchange for it. It's just, I can't imagine buying like a PlayStation 5 game and it being $100 a month SaaS fee to play the game, right? That would just never work. Nobody would ever purchase that.
No, it's a great example. And I'll give you an example like that's relevant. Like I bought, so I love my Switch because I travel a lot for business, so I can travel with it. It's fun. Folks on my team, I'll play against them and stuff. And I like I bought a game today for $29, right? And I'm like, okay, great price. Like I'm going to enjoy this game. It's going to be fun. But there's another game that I bought, which will remain nameless. And it's a racing game that I downloaded that's, associated with a pretty well-known, IP and brand. And I get into the game and I'm like, I can't access any of these cars. I have to buy like all these DLC packs that are like $20 each. And I'm like, okay, so I got the game for $30, but now if I want to use all these cars, I've got to pay another $80. And then if I want to actually use all these tracks, I've got to either like pay for expansion packs or like play the game for 50 hours. And I'm like, I just want what I had when I was a kid, which was, you and I are probably around the same age. It's like, I buy Zelda and I just play it and it's awesome and I beat it, or I buy, Mario Brothers 3 and I play it and it's awesome and I beat it. I don't want to, enter in and to be able to even play the game, I've got to instantly shell out $400. Like that's not a good consumer experience,
Yeah, you're not going to be satisfied.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the like necessary components of a gaming chain or I should say a chain that excels in attracting gaming solutions?
Yeah.
What do you think are the necessary components, the recipe for success for those chains?
So I think, that's a great question. So I think, first off, the high throughput piece is really important. And I've seen this a couple times, but like, there's a pretty well-known game that I actually think is pretty cool. And, they were doing a gaming tournament and I'm pretty sure it is what caused the chain to crash because, so many people wanted to play it at once. And again, like the chain wasn't built to process and support this, right? It's no different from like a website crashing, when there's too much traffic going through it. And so I think for us, like what we're seeing is a lot of, indie studio developers that are starting to dip their toes into blockchain. So these are folks that already, are creating Web2 games and already have, substantial businesses. And they're basically experimenting. They're like, we want to be early adopters and see kind of what we can do. And maybe there's innovative things we can do. But I think, a big reason they're choosing SKALE is, again, they're not basing it purely on grant dollars. I think 2 years ago with a lot of these early games, it was, where can we get the most money that's going to support our build? Obviously in a lot of countries, it's more challenging to raise VC dollars than in the US. But I think, again, it was a lot of folks were making decisions based on grant dollars versus what was best for, user adoption, or what was best for developer experience, or what was best for, supporting the actual needs of whatever they were building. And I think what I'm seeing now is, most of the folks that are choosing us, they're choosing us for a couple reasons. One, it's either you guys are high throughput. I know that I can launch this game, and if my game takes off, it's not going to break the chain. Like it's just going to work, right? The second thing is, I think, user adoption. So we tend to always fall in kind of top 5 in terms of most active users. And then when it comes to gaming chains, we're number one. We have over 230,000 active gaming wallets. Second is, I think, around 168. And then even for some of the, quote unquote gaming chains like Immutable, they only have 2,100 active gaming wallets on the chain, right? So I think there's a little bit of just maybe sometimes this misconception, but we have real gamers here who I do think are also coming in from kind of normie channels. And so what we find is a lot of games that come here will launch and then very quickly are able to actually build a real user base, a real player base, right? So the other thing that's interesting that I've noticed is, for games that either multi-chain over or kind of migrate over there from other chains, not only do they see kind of a new user base that comes from, this existing large gaming base, but a lot of times we see the actual user base on the previous chain move over as well. And it makes total sense, right? Because, let's say you're playing this game that was on Polygon and now it's available on Polygon and SKALE or just SKALE. One, it's going to be faster, right? And two, time to finality is also faster, right? But the big thing is, they're going to come over, the game's going to be faster, the game's going to have less latency issues, but also there's no gas fees, right? So if they were playing it over here, and spending, even if it was $20 a month, that's $250 a year. Now they can play the same game over here with improved performance for free. It's kind of a no-brainer. And so we've seen that happen pretty frequently. And I think just to kind of point back to some of the numbers, I mean, we've saved users over $7 billion in gas fees to date, and I think another 3 million in ETH from what I've heard. And then if you think about speed, I mean, our speed is 397 transactions per second. The closest to us is Solana at 375, but then that really starts to drop down. I mean, Avalanche is 49. Polygon is 20, Near is 6. I mean, these are big differences. And then same thing when we talk about things like time to finality, ours is, about 1.4 seconds. I think second fastest is, Phantom at 1.7, but then, it keeps going down from there. AVAX is close to 2 seconds. Solana's, 9.6 seconds. So this stuff does really matter over time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like, as an analogy, it's almost like you're upgrading from the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5 just by moving over to another chain, right? You have a better user experience. the fees are less, which I don't know what the analogy would be there, is maybe electric fees, which never happens, right? Usually electric fees usually go up as the system gets more powerful. And that's really cool. Like, I didn't realize that you have, gaming companies that exist on other chains that have been successful that are also choosing to build on scale. I guess it makes sense. It's like, we have an Android app and an Apple app kind of strategy, but it sounds like what you guys are seeing is because of your guys' more favorable end user economics, you're seeing the users start to migrate over there as well. They're saying, well, if I'm going to play it anywhere, I might as well play it over on scale.
100%. And I think that's also what's leading to kind of like growth and continued growth of the user base because, case in point, we've got 4 great games all in the Epic Game Store right now that look and play and feel like traditional video games, right? And so you think about it as, maybe one game existed on another chain, it launches on scale, those users come over to check it out, they realize they can play it faster and cheaper here. And then what do? They go, oh, what other games are over here? And they jump into the ecosystem page, and then they say, oh, well, Haven's Compass is a really cool like shooter game. I love that game. What's this game Stray Shot? This also looks like a shooter game. Or what's this game Fussy Fox that looks like a futuristic kind of shooter game? And so again, when you think about even things like opening up the Nintendo store, think about like discoverability there, right? It's like they've already brought you in through Mario Wonder, and now they can very easily serve you Donkey Kong, or they can very easily serve you Mario Kart. And there's already that intent. And so it's kind of the same thing with us. It's like, you come in through one game that you love, and it doesn't have to, by the way, be a PC game. It could be a casual mobile game. It could be a strategy game. It could even be chess. We have chess, for example. And what happens? It's like you come in, you start playing the chess, you love chess, and then you go, oh, there's also checkers, right? But on the other side, you're like, oh, I love engine building board games, and I find this game on scale that I love. And then all of a sudden I go, what other engine building games are there? What other strategy games are there? And so I'll give you a little alpha. I'm working on something right now that's going to make it a lot easier for you to find that stuff. So that's a little exciting, but yeah.
Yeah. I think that's key, right? Is like once you enter an ecosystem to be able to explore what's in that ecosystem. I think of like Steam, right? Like, I still don't know 95% of the games that exist on Steam, and I'm sure I would be interested in, well, more than none of them, right? I'd be interested in some of them, but it's now there's such a volume of games out there. Now you're running into the problem if it's hard to find the right one for you.
Right, exactly. It's no different than Netflix. It's that notion of, at the end of the day, when you have all of this content, it's really up to the platform to create a good, curation engine, because obviously that's, good for the customer, but then also good for, customer retention and duration and things like that. But that's what's been exciting for me is that like we're getting these great indie studios launching genuinely fun to play games. Folks are coming in, discovering them, being able to play them for the first time and not pay. And then all of a sudden they go, well, this game looks fun too. And the next thing you know, they're playing 5-6 different games on scale on a regular basis, So yeah, it's exciting.
And we talked about this. I think this is really important, right? So I'm very passionate. It's why I have a fund. It's why I have a media company. I'm very passionate about bringing the next billion users to Web3. And you and me had a really cool conversation a week ago on how you're hyper focused. A lot of crypto companies, as you've said, and chains have been focused on fighting over existing users. And it's a very small part of the world. And what I loved, and your approach, obviously, I very resonate with, which is, but what about all the people that aren't even in the ecosystem yet? And how do we get them on board in a way that doesn't require them to jump through all these hoops that you and me had to jump through in terms of almost being like this cyberpunk technologist, right? Like having a hard wallet and knowing how to like bridge assets and knowing how to do all these things. And I know you guys are really focused on how do we get these people that would love to be in the Web3 ecosystem. And maybe this is a really good way to get them in is through their first Web3 experience could be through a game. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about philosophy, what you guys are doing there, how you're hyper focused on bringing those users over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so part of it, the easiest way to think about it is, we are quote unquote the AWS of all these businesses building on top of us. And, we're creating the tools and resources that enable them to be successful, right? But again, if you take a step back, to your point, like blockchain is still technical and cumbersome, and there are barriers, I think, for the average everyday person, a la setting up wallets, wallet connects, processing transactions, all of that, right? And so I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen in the industry is like a lot of this is going to be abstracted and removed, right? But part of it, has to do with technology advancement. Part of it has to do with regulation and advancement. And so, but in the end, what'll probably happen is you'll go to a website, you'll sign in with an email address, you'll create a password, and it'll then auto-generate a backend wallet for you, and you may not even know it ever exists, right? And then again, you might go to a website to play a game, and it's processing transactions, and again, you don't even know that it's happening. And we're already kind of living that future at scale, which I think is exciting. But that's exactly it. If you think about how do you really bring people on chain? I always kind of go towards three different buckets. One is gaming. So you look at, again, some of these massive online games that have emerged over the years, and you look at the size of those player bases, and you're just like, listen, if someone can create, an incredible game franchise, it's fun to play, at the end of the day, that could be a massive onboarding tool. And then again, if they're using a technology like SKALE, there's no friction, right? So, when you went to a game 20 years ago and signed up online and started playing, you can effectively have that exact same experience with SKALE, right? In case in point is these games on the Epic Game Store, you download them and just start playing them, right? And then on the social side, when I worked with social media platforms back in the day, there's a lot of different growth strategies for social, but at the end of the day, these are products that can scale very, very quickly, right? But that also means that they require something that can handle that throughput and handle that scaling and handle those millions of users. And so, same thing over here. I think we could see, a single social app, and I don't even use the term social fi. I say social, launch, and maybe it's about, well, hey, now there's a competitor to Facebook where you control all your data and you own all your data and you can monetize your own data. So it may be more about privacy than it is like financial earnings. And then that could take off. And the next thing there's, all these people with this mobile app and they're using it just like Instagram, and they don't even realize that there's blockchain technology behind the scenes, right? And the other one that I've always thought about, which I can give you some examples at scale, is Web2 businesses. Because if you go back to my days at Amazon headquarters, I mean, we had an enormous customer base, right? And you think about, again, if when I was there at Amazon, we had decided to integrate, let's call it blockchain technology, into the Prime member program. Well, we have the instant ability to onboard, millions and millions of people. And so I've always said to myself, those are probably the three places that it's most likely to happen. And on the Web2 side, because most of us here are, older and we have kind of track records of success, most of us come from kind of Silicon Valley and Southern California. We have great relationships with Web2 businesses because we've all, worked at Web2 businesses back in the day. And so right now we've got, for example, Hurley, the Nike surf brand is built on our chain. We've got Stars, the television network. And then confidentially, we've got some pretty big consumer brands and teams that are building on us right now. But again, I think the reason they're building on us is they're like, I'm interested in getting into this space, but I need to do it in a way that my customers can actually onboard. And so much of, traditional blockchain technology provides a lot of friction and a lot of barriers for that.
Yeah, 100%. Look, this has been super insightful. I really appreciate your time. It's always fun to hang out. If people want to find out more about SKALE, dive into the ecosystem, maybe play their first game, how do they do that?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, best thing to do is, head over to the website. You can go to it's scale.space. You can bridge to SKALE, fill up on S-Fuel, which is not a gas token, but we use it in a very similar manner, and it's 100% free. And then, definitely head over to the ecosystem page and start looking at games or AI projects or things that are exciting for you. On Twitter, we're at SKALE Network. If you're a developer, at SKALE Developers. And then I'm at Andrew Saunders.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Andrew. Yeah. Guys, check out the content also, digitalwealthinsider.com. It'll be on all of our socials circulating around, and we'll see you next time.